helping people cope with and overcome life's challenges. This is Life Transformation with Michael Hart, award-winning psychotherapist, author, and Canadian certified counselor.
Thank you for joining us today on the Life Transformation Show. We're continuing our series, Great Women of the Bible. And today we will turn to one of the most profound yet often overlooked stories in Scripture, the Widow of Zarephath, found in 1 Kings 17. Well, I don't know what you may be going through this morning, listeners, but God has laid this episode heavily on our hearts. And we believe this show will encourage someone who is facing an incredibly difficult life circumstance and is beginning to lose hope. You don't have to lose hope. Stay tuned for this show, not only to encourage you, but to remind you that God has not forgotten you. He has heard your prayers and He has seen your tears. But before we start, if you're new to this show, you can find out more about Elim Counseling Services by calling 613-699-1677 or 1-877-20294. And if you need counseling support, you can call the same number. So listeners, it's getting close to our upcoming healing retreat entitled Restored and Transformed. This will be a powerful weekend devoted to emotional healing and lasting freedom. So get your name on the list. It begins Friday, June 12th at 5 p.m. through Sunday, June 14th, 2026. This intimate Bible-based retreat experience is designed to help you find freedom from emotional pain, break negative generational patterns, and heal deep emotional wounds. Space is limited, and so we encourage you to register and reserve your spot by going to elimcounselingministry.com. We would truly love to see you there. So, as usual, I am in studio with psychotherapist and author Michael Hart of Elim Counseling Services. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you so much, Denise. It's so good to be back in studio to continue one of my favorite series, the Great Women of the Bible series. It was a blast last week to do the episode on the life of Hannah. And today, as you said, we are going into a new story about the Widow of Zarephath. And I can't wait to get into that.
Well, let's get started, Michael. Can you begin by giving us a brief overview of this story and help us understand why this story about the Widow of Zarephath is so relevant for those who are facing emotional suffering?
This story is relevant for anyone who has suffered trauma of some kind. It is also relevant for people who have gone through betrayal or is facing any kind of emotional anguish. So we meet this woman in the story, and she's at the lowest point in her life. She's facing starvation. She's living in the midst of a famine, and she only have enough food left over for one meal. And the Bible tells us that she and her son is planning to have this meal and then to die after. This is how dire the situation is. And this kind of a traumatic situation causes the brain to be fixed on survival. There is no hope for the future. It is only focused on the present. So maybe you're going through something in your life and this has occupied your mind. It has become your focus and your mind has been preoccupied with how am I going to deal with this issue that is before me. Can I survive this? Is there hope for the future? What will become of me after this? And in this state, hope begins to diminish and the focus becomes on the overwhelming situation. And yet, in this story, in the middle of that despair and hopelessness, God steps in. And that is what makes the story so powerful because it shows us that God does not wait for our circumstances to improve before He intervenes. He meets us right in the middle of our pain at the right time.
Exactly, Michael. God always meets us where we're at. You know what stands out immediately is that this woman is not in a place of strength, but she's depleted. You know, when I read this story, she has lost her husband, her stability, and now even her basic resources are running out. Yet, that becomes the very place where God begins to move. In Psalms 147, verse 3, it states, He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. So, Michael, as we begin to unpack her story, help us understand how deeply what was happening in her environment. Because this wasn't just a personal suffering. It seems like it was something much larger than that.
Yes, so famine is not just about food scarcity. It is about a systematic breakdown of normal life. And often famine in the Bible is as a result of divine judgment because people have turned away from God. And in the midst of that suffering, there's an additional layer of suffering that is implied in the story by us being giving the information that she is a widow. Because in biblical times, a widow had limited means of support to begin with. Her survival was often tied to the presence of a husband or to an extended family system. Without that, she would have faced economic hardship and social marginalization. So, what we're seeing here is not just a difficult situation, it is a convergence of multiple stressors, grief, financial instability, and environmental crisis. The Bible doesn't tell us how her husband died, but the grief is implied in the statement that she is a widow. And psychologically, this convergence of circumstances is what we would call compounded trauma, where multiple layers of stress intersect and intensify the emotional burden. So this woman, the widow of Zarephath, was in a very severe situation that looked hopeless.
That's such an important perspective, Michael. You know, this helps us to understand that our response is coming from that deep place of depletion. And yet, even in that place, she's still able to respond when Elijah approaches her. There's still something within her that remains open. Isn't that true?
Exactly. And that is one of the most remarkable aspects of her story because we know that trauma often leads people to withdraw, to protect, and to conserve what little they have left. But when Elijah enters her life, she doesn't shut down. She opens up. She engages with the prophet of God. She responds in a relational way. And so Elijah asked her for a meal. And here it is that she is responding by giving to Elijah the last meal that she had left for her and her son. And this shows to me that this woman is spiritual. It shows that she's open to possibility. She realizes that he is a man of God and that he is the doorway through which God would begin to work in her life. So to someone listening today, you may feel like you are in survival mode. You may feel exhausted, overwhelmed, and unsure of what the future holds. And your instinct may be to withdraw or to protect what you have from further disappointment or pain. But the widow in the story reminds us that even in those moments, there is still space for connection. There is still space to trust God with the little that you have, with the little energy that you have. Maybe it's your last step. Maybe it's the last thing that you feel that you can do. Maybe it's the last contact that you feel that you can make. Maybe it's the last church service that you feel you can attend. But what this widow did was to trust God with the last little bit that she had. And I'm calling out to you. I don't know what's left in your reserve tank, but whatever it is, I am calling you to trust God to multiply it by giving it over to Him.
Yes, Michael, our God can do the impossible. That request of giving her last meal to Elijah, that must have been very difficult for this woman, this widow, actually. And this shows that she was acting on faith.
Absolutely, because from a human perspective, this request appears completely unreasonable and irrational. She has already expressed that she has only enough for one final meal. And now the prophet, the man of God, is asking her to make a meal, make a bread with what she has left, and to give it to him. So this psychologically creates what we would call a conflict between survival instinct and trust. The prophet of God is putting her in a position where she has to make a decision. Am I going to act based on survival instincts alone, or am I going to trust God with my actions? And I think when we're in survival mode, we're often called to make those kind of decisions. Maybe you're in a financial crisis. Opportunities may present themselves in ways that you could be dishonest to make more money, to pay your debt and to pay your bills off. But are you going to make that decision to survive financially, or are you going to trust God in your actions? Maybe you have been praying for a partner and someone presents themselves as the dream person that you have been praying for, but they are now calling you to do things that will cause you to compromise your morals. You have been placed in the same situation as this widow of Zarephath. Are you going to act on your survival instinct to get that partner that you have, or that husband or wife that you have always been praying for? Or are you going to act based on your values and morals and trust God that if I keep my values and this person leaves me, God will still provide someone for me? So the survival instinct says, let's preserve and protect and hold on to what is in front of us. But faith introduces a different response. Faith says, release it, trust God, and act in a way that is consistent with your faith.
We will be right back. You have been listening to the Life Transformation Show, where award-winning psychotherapist and author Michael Hart of Elim Counseling Services has been speaking on the topic of the Widow of Zarephath, God in the midst of suffering. You can find out more about us at elimcounselingministry.com or by calling 613-699-1677 or 1-877-204-2914. Please consider making a donation to this Christ-centered ministry through Elim Mental Health Foundation. Your donations help us to stay on the air and to provide subsidized counseling to those who can't afford it. So, Michael, before the break, we are continuing to speak about this real tension, that people have. Whenever people are gone through trauma or face just their natural response is to kind of hold tightly to whatever remains, whatever they have. So why is it so difficult for people to trust when they are in this survival mode?
That's a very good question, because trauma puts us in this mode where we want to protect and to preserve our existence and to remain safe. So if you have your heart broken by someone you trust, trauma will say to you, be careful who you trust again. Guard yourself, preserve yourself, keep yourself away from people because your heart may be broken. But the thing about trauma is that if you allow yourself to operate always in this fight or flight mode, you are robbing yourself of potential for growth. You are robbing yourself of potential for others to come alongside you and be sources of blessings in your life. So many people who have suffered abandonment in their childhood, they protect themselves. They hold on to their sense of safety by building a wall around themselves and not letting others in. But that holding on to preserve themselves and to preserve the little safety that they have is also restricting their world so that they cannot grow and become what God intended for them to become. So that's why it is difficult. There is this tension between survival instinct and the trust. And whatever your trauma is, change becomes when you begin to trust. If it's an automobile accident that have made you afraid to go around the steering wheel of a car again, change only comes when you put your situation back in the feared, in front of the thing that you fear, to be back behind that steering wheel. That's when you will overcome your fear. You will never overcome your fear by holding on and preserving the little comfort that you have. You have to take risk. And this widow of Zarephath, she took a risk with the little that she had. So when Elijah asked her to give, he is not just asking her for food. He is asking her to step out of survival-based mindset into a faith-based posture. He's asking her to see her lack of resources with eyes of faith. And that's what led to the profound change and shift in this story.
So, Michael, what I'm hearing you say is that trust should really change our mindset. And in Proverbs 3 verse 5, it states, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding, because we can't do it in our own self. So, what do we learn about her response in this moment?
Her response in this moment shows us that she is able to see hope in the midst of her dire need. This woman is not being self-centered, or she's not being selfish. She is acting in a way that makes her very smart indeed, because what she's saying, I see something in this man. This man is a man of God. I see something here that gives me hope that there is a possibility of change. She recognized something that others may have missed. And this is the heart of what we see in that moment, because I think when we are in fight or flight mode, and we're in this place where we're in survival mode, we often miss the signs that God is putting before us. So this woman was able to see that God had sent Elijah her way. And so 1 Kings 17:15 tell us that she went away and did as Elijah told her. So this to me says that she is now taking action with her faith. She's not being passive. She's moving to a position of action because she sees something and she's acting on it. Now, like, my question to you is, what has God been showing you in the midst of your suffering and pain that you may need to pay more attention to? This woman could have been so focused on her pain that she missed the fact that Elijah was sent from God. But she was able to see him for what he is. And her obedience to her request was what brought profound change to her circumstance. So my point here, the main point here, is that when you're in suffering and survival mode, it's easy for you to be so focused on your pain that you miss the things that God is doing in your midst. Sometimes I see people who have come through trauma and they're still talking in terms of what has not been healed. And I may have to say to them, can you think about some things that have already changed, some things that have been healed, some things that are different this year than it was last year? And it's only when their focus shift to look at what God has been doing that they can see that God has been in their midst and already moving on their behalf. So I'm speaking to someone today that is going through a severe situation, and I'm saying, shift your focus from what is lacking to what God is doing. Shift your focus from what you lack to what you have.
Oh, that is so powerful, Michael. That's really a powerful principle that this widow acted on, because she acted before she was certain of anything at all. So this really speaks to people. Anyone who feels stuck right now, that they can have some hope, and they can just pray and believe and trust in God for the answer.
Absolutely. And there's another powerful layer here, important layer, her generosity. She gives in her moment of lack. And this aligns with what we see in psychological research around generosity. Studies show that acts of giving, even in difficult circumstances, can increase a person's sense of meaning and emotional well-being and internal strength, because generosity shifts focus from scarcity to purpose. It activates areas of the brain associated with reward and connection and shift it away from survival. And spiritually, that act of generosity position the individual to participate in what God is doing in their life.
So, Michael, as we read further into the story, 1 Kings 17, verse 16, it tells us that the jar of flour was not used up and the jug of oil did not run out. So, what do you see in that detail? I feel like I'm missing something.
That's a good observation, and I think that's the part of the text that's often misunderstood because we read that to mean that there was a miracle and her barrel was full of flour and her jars was full of oil. But that's not what it means. What it means is that God kept replenishing the supply daily. So she had enough for each day. And that's a very powerful point because what it meant is that she had to keep trusting God each day. And for people who are going through trauma, God is not asking you to take big steps and to look far into the future. He's asking you to trust Him with your life one day at a time.
Well, Michael, that was quite insightful. Now we've come to the end of our show. And thank you for such an encouraging discussion. We're reminded that God is always working, even in the seasons that feel painful. So if today's message spoke to you, we encourage you to share it with someone who may need hope in the middle of their own story. You can replay this episode and past ones by searching our YouTube channel. Join us next week as we discuss another powerful story. The Shunammite woman, faith that refuses to let go. And remember to reserve your spot for upcoming healing retreat. If you've been blessed by this ministry, please consider supporting Elim Mental Health Foundation. And if you're seeking support, visit elimcounselingministry.com. Until next time, this is your co-host, Denise Hart.
And Michael Hart, praying together that God would bless you in all your relationships and to keep you sound in mind and pure in heart.